Okay. You getting it? Great. So thank you all for coming. I'm Steve Pollack. I am the technology lead in the life sciences at Carbon. We're in Redwood City, a manufacturer of 3D printers and of the resins we print with. And what I'm going to try to spend the next 20 minutes, half an hour, telling you about is what we're doing and what we're anticipating doing in the life science space. So our vision overall is that we're planning to disrupt manufacturing. We think that 3D printing has already moved beyond the prototyping stage, and that we're at a place now where we can anticipate really using additive manufacture and specifically 3D printing to make products at a scale that's comparable to injection molding in small scale and with a quality that's equivalent to it. So this is our process. This is our digital synthesis process. So if you're familiar with the Carbon's product, we print in an inverted SLA geometry, light coming from below into a resin pool. The resin is a UV active resin, and as the part is cured, at the bottom of the reservoir, not only are we delivering light, we're delivering a dose of oxygen. The oxygen works in opposition to the generation of free radicals by the light, so you are preventing polymerization exactly at the window. Therefore, there's no part adhesion at the window, and you have the opportunity for very rapid printing. But the other opportunity that's more critical in the life science space to me is that you can use it for materials that don't have to have full material property during the print process. So during the print process, and these are Trocar handles made out of our cyanate ester resin, these materials are in a green state, and that state allows us to then add a second chemistry that we thermally activate in a programmed way to get the full material properties, all the way from an elastomer like you see in the Adidas type shoes, all the way to a high temperature, high modulus material. That cyanate ester resin jumped from 400 to 4,000 megapascals as we went from the green state to the cured state. I'm not going to spend any large amounts of time on the materials chemistry today. Dr. Matt Menu is going to be here tomorrow at 12:20, and he'll spend most of his time describing our materials chemistry. I'm going to focus more on where we think we're going to be and where we currently are in the medical device space. Again, to familiarize yourself with Carbon as a company, Carbon was in existence around 2013, came out of stealth in 2015. I heard about it the same time you all did. I've been there about a year and a half. We've had about $250 million in investment. Last March at AMUG, we released our M1 family of printers. These have a 3.2 by 5.7 by 1 foot tall print volume. Those systems are out in the field now with a large number of partners. And this past March at AMUG, we released the M2 printer. This is now a double the volume of print volume to work with, essentially 4 by 10. In the XY axis, and still about a foot in foot in height rather. We also released the print wash, the smart print washer. The notion there is if you're going to manufacture, you don't want to be doing handwork to get to that last stage. And so this system is integrated along with our M2 printer in clusters that we refer to as speed cells. And the speed cell now practically sets you up for 3D manufacture in a normal manufacturing environment. We use a subscription model, which is different from a lot of the other companies. That model tells us that we're in league with you all the way through the process of subscribing to the printer, through the time that you're developing your print process, that we are committed to have you love us and love our printers and have materials that come out in a finished final product that's what you need as you move forward in your manufacture. And we're now set up with the M2 and the part washer for full-scale manufacture. Just a little bit about the materials. So all of these are our family of materials, and they really come in two broad flavors. There's a UV-only activated material. It's called UMA. That's a material that prints and is finished at the UV stage. It just requires removal of residual resin and a post-flash cure in UV to be final and workable. Unlike conventional prototyping resins, it actually has reasonable mechanical properties, and it's biocompatible. And I'll go into detail about the biocompatibility a little further on. Then the other family are our programmed resins. You saw the original drawing of a cyanate ester resin. The larger family are our polyurethanes. 3 different resins ranging in property from a rigid polyurethane, not unlike an unfilled nylon or an ABS, a flexible polyurethane, not unlike a polypropylene, and if you come to the booth, you can manipulate the living hinge structures that we've implemented in it to see that it actually performs like a polypropylene. And then finally, the elastomeric polyurethane, which is like a thermoplastic urethane system. That's the base chemistry for the Adidas shoe. I will make a disclaimer, I'm wearing their shoes, but I have no implants made with our devices on board right now. The cyanate ester resin goes to 220 heat distortion temperature, and the epoxy resin goes to 150 heat distortion temperatures, 4,000 megapascals modulus on the cyanate ester resin. All because we have this ability for programmed chemistry and programmed synthesis. And just a little bit about moving from prototyping to manufacture. You know, the normal process that we all go through is we go through a digital design these days, less about a sketch and more about a CAD drawing. Directly create that part, and now we prototype. And we might prototype with foam core, we might prototype with prototyping resin. And then the next step, how do I convert that to a tooling that's going to injection mold or cast my object? I have to go through a whole different re-engineering step, change my thinking before I can actually get to the point of first use manufacture and then finalize the mold and get to the final part. What if you could do your design and your actual manufacturer on the same platform? If you could de-intermediate the process so that you're designing, you're iterating your designs on one platform and then simply shifting over to a production mode with no real change in any of your engineering, but simply scaling up. We can now do that. We're doing that with the Adidas partnership. We're doing that with some partnerships in the medical space. Where we think we want to be and where we think it's logical to be in life sciences can be taken into some broad categories, and the categories we think that are the easiest low-hanging fruit for anybody in this space are going to be in the diagnostic space, where we can create objects from microfluidic channels, either in bioseparations or in diagnostic space. Simple device components, external covers, robotic components, connectors, electrical connectors. External devices that can be on the surface of the body for a brief period of time without concern, again, because we have biocompatibility information on all these resins, that's now possible. And then finally, we start to talk about the FDA's concerns about biocompatibility. My life before coming to Carbon was running the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories at FDA. So understand what the toxicologists are thinking there. And we think in terms of these as crawl, walk, and run. We're very comfortable at this point with our materials in the short-term space because the requirements for the testing are reasonable as we develop new resins. As we get further along in the process to midterm and to permanent implants, we'll do more of that in partnership with manufacturers because in the end, they're responsible to test the device. The FDA doesn't approve materials, but we can provide the right information to say up front that the materials have the greatest chance and likelihood of making it through that gauntlet, given that we know the biomaterial properties of the raw material through its process to solid. Everybody's talked about personalized therapies as the first logical place for additive manufacture to make its largest mark. So this is not new. Probably the earliest adopter of 3D printing have been the dental market, the dental laboratories and dentists. And we have just brought out a material DPR10, and we have begun to work with dental laboratories to engage them in evaluating this material and starting to interact and provide DPR10 models. We're beginning to explore castable resins, and ultimately we'll be looking at surgical guide materials. Mindful that as we move into those other spaces, we have to have the appropriate biocompatibility information as we get into those spaces where FDA is more concerned. So DPR10 is a simple UV resin, so very quickly printed onto either M2 or M1 and available to send back to the surgeon rapidly. We're looking for leveraging the speed of our print to get very rapid turnaround time for the dental laboratories. They're in the business of manufacturing parts quick and getting them back to the dentist. And we think we can enable that with our technology. So this is an example, more of a design iteration in a material that's very unique. This is Worrell is a medical device designer up in Minnesota, and we work with them to try to look at ways to rapidly iterate the design on a respirator. So this is an N99 model respirator, and the critical feature here is fit. So they're thinking about bespoke geometries for the respirator, but to do bespoke geometries and iterate in an elastomer that has full elastomeric properties is a challenge. So this is our EPU 40 resin. This is again the same sort of base resin as in the shoes. And we can print that object in about 3 hours total time for the print plus the vulcanization step to make a fully vulcanized, fully mechanically robust mask that then can be rapidly turned around for iteration and ultimately manufactured on the same platform. This is a Trocar Handle designed by Black River Designs, and the question here was, how do you make a bespoke object when it's not the patient who wants the modification, but it's the surgeon? Well, frequently you'll go through lots of iteration of injection mold. You may make model by casting. So here what we did was to do this in our RPU 70 polymer, which is our rigid material. And the real design feature was manipulatability of the handle. How do you rapidly change the texture to make the best possible experience for the surgeon? And so if you can see from left to right, we go to the handle with no detailing on the surface, to a noise textured object, to one with a more geometric sort of imprint. This was a simple matter of taking the STL, painting where we wanted the embossing, and going to print. No requirement to make a special mold, very rapid iteration of design, and again, a material that is steam sterilizable and fully biocompatible, can go into the OR. This is a cutting guide. A number of people have worked in this space. This was simply for us a proof of concept that you could very rapidly come up with a design for a medical device, make a bespoke object that was for the patient, and turn it out in a material that had reasonable properties. We expect to explore this space more. Again, now that we have biocompatibility data for our resins, we see a path forward in the orthopedic surgery space. Let me talk a little bit more about the biocompatibility. We've run all of our resins through cytotoxicity. We have data for all except for our soft materials, and the guinea pigs only work as fast as they will. So we expect to have that data back by the end of the month, and we'll be releasing that information. I would also note that one of the materials that's not currently on our list of available materials is a silicone, and that material will come out late summer, and we've already tested it for biocompatibility and it passes. So we expect to see a biocompatible silicone for medical device use at that point. If biocompatibility was the only benchmark, then we'd be fine, but the reality is when you bring an object into the OR, it has to be sterile, which means that besides being biocompatible, you have to survive sterilization conditions. So we've challenged all of our materials with all of the normal modalities for sterilization. So high temperature sterilization, our EPX material, and our RPU material, which is surprising. It's a lower TG material, but it's a thermoset. So it survives and maintains its geometry under steam sterilization for as much as 300 cycles of sterilization. Our CE has a little bit more limited window in sterilization, so probably more realistic for a disposable or for incidental requirements of sterilization when the surgeon drops the object. All of our materials are completely compatible with the cold sterilization. So we can ethylene oxide for all the materials and E-beam and gamma for all the materials, with the proviso that when you work with a linear polymer and you do ionizing beam radiation, that you'll get some change in mechanical properties. But it's not a dramatic enough change to not allow for them to be engineered with that property in mind. Almost any linear polymer used in the medical device space that's sterilized by ionizing radiation will change properties. Ours aren't particularly different. So with all that, what do you get? Well, you get design freedom. You get the ability to use microscale structures, things that you couldn't necessarily do before. You get to make undercut structures that aren't going to create a very expensive tool. You get to work with fine meshes that may provide for you lightening, but also high surface area if you're looking at a bioseparation. Thin walls are going to be required if you're trying to make catheters with lumens or small areas, and controlled spacing, porosity, and complex fluidics. I like to say that the only people that had the opportunity to work with lattice structures before were civil engineers. We now get the choice to do that on the small scale, and this technology is enabling for that. So here's an example of where this process works for a medical device application. This is a CT scan cross-section of a valve. So essentially it's a knife edge valve that seats for a fluidic system. This is care of our colleagues at Brecht and Dickinson. So what you see here are 3 examples where they initially did this part in SLA, conventional SLA, and the part didn't work as a seal. And the engineers thought they had misdesigned it. They came back and did it with the M1 machine at the 75 micron pixel size resolution at the 100 micron slicing, which is standard. What you're seeing is the fidelity of the cross section in the blue relative to the actual STL file. This part sealed the first time. When they went to the superfine, which is a 25 micron resolution Z-axis, more fidelity, just as good as seal. So very rapidly iterating to a functional part that has the right chemistry to be operating, in this case, in a bioanalytical system. This is a bit of fun, but also of reality. We took some examples from the patent literature of a distal end of an endoscope made from one component. This is made out of the RPU70 material. These form very robust, semi-flexible objects made from a single production part that's basically able to be snapped fit together and has the appropriate geometry to then create the distal end of an endoscope. Again, sterilizable, appropriate for that application. And again, the mindset is usually we'll do our prototyping in a 3D space, and then we'll go to an injection mold. So this is an example, again, of a prototype sort of object captured from the clinical literature. One of our engineers in the production studio sat down for a day with a CAD software and created this multi-component transcutaneous access port for laparoscopic surgery. It's a 3-component design. It's an elastomeric component with the 3 access ports, rigid polyurethane for the caps on those ports to maintain water tightness, and the waste, the object with the waste, which actually occupies the space of the incision, all out of biocompatible materials and designed basically in a day and printed in another 2 days. This could be brought into the OR for a cadaver study almost immediately and very easily transitioned into manufacture. None of these parts are readily injection molded without very expensive tooling, undercuts, cam action points, and the elastomer. Let me spend a little bit more time with that. If this were going to be an injection molded medical device, that's our approximated timeline to get to the first iteration of the first object that you could put into a cadaver or a patient. A week of design, 1 to 3 weeks to make the injection mold for the soft tooling. Another, depending on your supplier, 6 to 12 weeks to get the mold back in-house and do the shooting. Test the mold, refine the tool, and get into the patient or get into the cadaver. 3 weeks is the reality. That's what we see with using direct manufacture. And the amortization of the mold, when you go to production, will not equal what the cost savings is in doing this by direct manufacture. The other advantage we see is that healthcare and healthcare manufacture is now global. Parts are not all manufactured in this country, and they're not supplied just in this country. So if one can move the means of manufacture closer to the site of sale and the site of use, we provide great advantage. So we think that's appropriate with our technology. You can have a fleet of our printers at a manufacturing site rather than warehousing. The biggest trouble in the medical device space is the expense that the companies have in holding many SKUs worth of parts rather than doing a real-time, as-needed manufacture. So we enable that. The other part that we enable is its digital manufacture from start to finish. The hardware is a technology based out of a digital approach. We do over-the-air software updates in real time. We have fleet management dashboards. So that's our production laboratory at Carbon. All of those printers are controllable and monitorable from a single desk point. We have real-time feedback on the machine's health and its operating characteristics, and we're monitoring that continuously back at Redwood City. We see before you do that there's a problem with the machine that you may never get to see because we'll have compensated for droop in the light engine. Or we'll be ordering that part that you need delivered and have it to you the next day. In a healthcare setting, waiting a week may not be appropriate. And we feel that that's something that we bring to the table, is this real-time support and active prediction of machine's operation. And if you're manufacturing in the medical device space, you have the regulatory requirements of understanding the life cycle of the process and the cradle to grave of your product. This is an elastomeric stent for the upper airway. We did this in collaboration with colleagues at University of Minnesota. This is about yay big. This is made out of elastomer. Wall thickness is about 300 microns. The spiral is to allow it to stay in place in the lung. We can, if there's a failure in a production environment, target which build, which resin, what day, what operator. That's all captured as we run our software. And we can go back and understand where the failure mode is, correct it, but also understand if there's a batch level problem and be able to work with the regulatory body of to mitigate that. Lastly, some of the things I mentioned earlier in terms of being able to, in near real time, change part texture, also go to being able to part label. As people are required to do universal device identifiers on their medical devices, that's a process that we're building into our workflow. So it'll be tracked along with all of the other metadata for the printing of a part, and again, satisfy that regulatory requirement. And our partnership model really works well in this. We are inclusive in our service support. We're continuously supporting the machines. We're watching for upgrades that are necessary. We're mindful that in the medical device space, a software upgrade is not a no big deal thing. It's a major concern. And so we are taking steps to find solutions that are appropriate in the medical device space, be that freezing a fork of our software or modularizing so that a manufacturer can say, there's been no change in the software that materially would affect how my part produces. That would be a requirement of the FDA, and we are sensitive to that. When we bring out new resins, you get the same access to the resin that we do. We don't do a new charge or a new feature enhancement. It's built into the software, to the subscription to the machine. We're trying to future-proof our machines. So when you lease a carbon printer, be it an M1 or an M2 or an M23, that we're in with you for the long run, and that you'll be using that machine with us along your side during that entire process. It's been an interesting year and a half at Carbon. I'm very excited about where this takes medical device manufacture and where it's going to take patients and their health, and I'd be happy to answer questions at this point. You can contact me up in Redwood City at the numbers up on the board. Thanks. Okay. I scared him.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you do those FDA approvals, when you do the FDA approvals, you need to approve the process, or you need to approve a specific machine that's standing in a specific place?
So it's a great question. So the first piece is FDA won't approve the resins. They don't, with one notable exception, the dental space. There, if you're making a dental resin, then you need FDA approval because your resin is considered the source of a final product, and the dentists are the manufacturer, so FDA regulates dental materials that end up in the mouth. So the surgical guides, the bite guards, those are resins that are regulated. You have to get a 510K if it's a bite guard. You have to have less listing and registration if you're making a surgical guide or a mouth tray. If you're going to incorporate your machine into manufacture, ultimately the client is going to expect that you can provide them the kind of information they need to survive an FDA audit about their manufacturing process. If you're in the 510K, or the 510K or the exempt space, manufacturing is not something the FDA sees until there's a problem. And then they can come back and audit, so you should have the documentation and the quality systems in place. For a PMA device, it's all in, and you have to have that manufacturing data up front as part of the submission. But for 510K and for Class 1, the machine manufacturer or the resin developer really has to be there for their client when they are in trouble. Yes?
I would like to ask you, this collaboration, that means that you will have a machine and you will build the things for us, or I need to buy the machine and then we start the collaboration?
So it depends, and it would be leasing the machine, just to be clear. So we have both flavors. We've had some early collaborations where it made the most sense for us to keep the machine in-house, to iterate on materials and iterate on printing modalities, and at some point we transfer, and it becomes the operation of the collaborative partner, where we then try to scale up, get it into their hands, get it into their manufacturing flow, so that it's integrated as any other device that they would be manufacturing with. And so the collaborations tend to evolve from that initial stage of us doing some engineering to holding their hands to get them familiar with the printer and the technology, to having them have multiple printers in their facility actually manufacturing.
So how far does your software go to date? Like, is it just a slicer?
No. Our software is capable of supporting, it's capable of orienting, it's capable of resolving for a given resin what the appropriate print modality is, because it recognizes the mechanical properties of the resin, it understands the thermochemical processes of 3D printing. It recognizes what shrinkage you would expect, given that there is a two-cure system. There's shrinkage in any 3D printed system that's based on SLA just from the UV cure, but there's additional shrinkage you would expect because of this second thermosetting process. And we take all that into account within that software that resides within the printer. Beyond that, you could take third-party software and do supporting off the machine if you felt there was some custom supporting that you needed. Right now we don't do internal meshing, we will. And right now the embossing software is on stream to become a standard feature, a button push procedure. Right now it's multi-step.
Is there anything else in the future that you guys are looking to add?
Lots, but I don't know I can't give you a specific. People have asked us if we'll have segmentation software for folks that are doing medical modeling, and I don't know that that's in our roadmap in the short term, but if the business case makes sense, we'll think about that.
Thanks.
Oh, no other, you got a question over there?
Okay, here's...
Is this the hardball question?
No, not the hardball. You talked about orientation. Can you explain a little bit about that kind of technology and what you're planning to achieve and what the results that you think you can achieve with orientation?
Okay, so one of the things I didn't mention, thank you, you gave me a lead for something I should have mentioned. One of the advantages of this oxygen layer that creates the dead zone, you know, saying that it's simply, it solidifies or it doesn't solidify is simplistic. As you'd imagine, as we're bringing oxygen in through the bottom, we're creating an oxygen gradient. At the top of the window, at the interface between the window and the liquid resin, the oxygen tension is very high. I think I'm echoing. As you move away from the window and into the pool of liquid resin, the oxygen tension is going down, and as the concentration of oxygen goes up, the polymerization rate goes down. So at the bottom of the window, you're not polymerizing. As you move up, you're polymerizing more and more until you're at the full rate of UV catalyzed polymerization. So you've got a gradient of solidification at each step. So I print that first step of the file, bring the build platform up, and I've got a solid to gel kind of transition. I do the next step of polymerization in that gradient of solidification. So there are no layers. It's a monolithic solid. You can break apart in half and you will not find layers. And that means that we have isotropic properties from the beginning. Add to that, with our engineering resins, we're now doing a total three-dimensional network formation that only goes to reinforce the isotropic nature. Our X, Y, and Z mechanical properties are identical. And let me add a piece to that. That leverages the advantage of using lattices, because now I don't care what lattice I use, every strut has the same strength.
I was going to add a little bit to that.
Okay.
In regards to porosity and how you take it to that next step. Because when you're talking ingrowth and so forth, what you want to achieve, if you're going to do an implantable, that's something that would be advantageous for your material.
Right. So we've had people who are thinking about bone replacement technologies talk with us, and they're full stop. We're not at the place now where we can say permanent implant. Not comfortable with that. We're going to have to go slowly, because there's a large difference between a 24-hour implantable, a 24-hour material and a permanent implant material in terms of the regulatory requirement and the cost to get that information. So we're going to take slow steps and do them in partnership. Okay. Repeat performances are good.
I was just wondering about, was oxygen, I know you've tested other gases, was oxygen the best one? And what other, I know you can't answer certain questions, so what were the other things that you saw using other gases?
So those are one of the certain questions I can't answer. Right. I'll help you understand. Well, if no other questions, thank you all for attending. Remember, Matt Manuel will be here tomorrow at 12:20 to talk in depth about our materials chemistry. Thank you. Thanks. I'll give this guy back that.